when affirmative comes up here and starts doing math on how much of a racial ethnicity you must be before you can adopt a child of that ethnicity, they intrinsically admit a fault that they have. That is that they don't have enough parents of the same ethnicity to adopt these children, and that they need to settle for whatever they can get because they realize that they actually don't have the parents available. For, as they admitted, far more children of these vulnerable minority groups in the foster care system than white children. 3 substandards for the House today. First, on the characterization of who adopts and the harm to minority children under their model. Second, on the benefits of interracial families to diversity and cultural development. And third, on the regression and segregationist nature of the model and the practical harms of that. First then, on the harms to minority children. As they admitted at first, there are far more people in the foster care system that are minorities that are unadopted. That is to say that they are unadopted because of people not willing to be open-minded enough to adopt them. This idea that there is a difficulty towards adopting them. But let's look at more specifically, who adopts? Yes, it is people who want to. It's people who perhaps might be infertile, part of the LGBT community, who want to raise their children but have no other means to do so. But it's also people who can, who have the facilities, who have the financial means, and also have this cultural want to do so. There are many reasons why this will become worse on the affirmative side of the house. That's to say why less minority children would be adopted under this house. First, let's look at just statistics. In most of our countries, and even developing countries, minorities tend to be more impoverished. This is to say they tend to live in communities that are less socioeconomically developed, and meaning they are less likely to have these financial means. Now, affirmative asserts that in our modern democracies, the upper class is likely to be heterogeneous and full of different culture. We just categorically reject this assertion based on this widely available information on the racial disparities in income and in wealth distribution in most of our countries, including the most progressive those, such as New Zealand. But even if we take them at their best and assume that there are people who are financially available to adopt these children, there are still cultural aspects that make adoption by parents of minority cultures more difficult. For example, certain cultures, particularly minority cultures, may believe that adopting a child is not as good as having a child themselves to an extent that is greater than for most white Christian values. As to say that even if they can, they are less likely to want to. This is a problem because let's look at who is most likely to be up for adoption. It is the minorities. They've admitted this. They also bring the strawman example of Afghanistan, suggesting that an Afghan child after the war can only be adopted by a white parent, that's bad for them. But we suggest to them that it's even worse if an Afghan child comes to the United States, is rescued, suddenly finds there are no Afghan parents who meet a 25% threshold that they set, and therefore can no longer be adopted because the state has determined that their cultural identity is somehow going to be preserved only if that occurs, and that they can't be adopted by a white parent who can bring them up, raise them outside the foster care system, because of this lack of racial diversity. How does this practically harm them? First and foremost, it burdens the foster care system, and it burdens the minority children within them. The foster care system is typically attributed to be very bad for a child's development because they aren't able to make these connections, meaningful connections with families. We point out here that these meaningful connections don't necessarily have to have a cultural basis. Because we prefer a minority children to have a good relationship with a parent of any culture, rather than being stuck in the foster care system, which is far more likely to happen under their side of the house without these available parents to adopt them. Second, it actually perpetuates racial division and inequalities when you suggest to these parents, like would-be parents, or to these children, that they can't be adopted by someone of a different culture because their cultures are just dissimilar and they somehow can't be integrated together, that these cultures can't coexist, that they're always going to tokenize them if they are adopted. This obviously harms minority children because they're stuck in the foster care system. They're told that they can't be raised by someone who doesn't look like them. And just like on this material about how a white parents are less likely to be able to go to Afghanistan, we just understand the straw manning argument because their arguments fully rely on this example that is just extreme. Whereas what we're actually talking about is black children in the United States or multi-Pacifica children in New Zealand being in the foster care system. That leads me to my second point on the benefits of interraciality, diversity, and cultural development.
Why is it that in the US, majority of the black children are left in the foster care system, but no one actually adopting them under your status quo?
Okay, that is actually a good point. There are still entrenched social barriers. But the way to resolve this isn't through regressing and saying that now the few white parents who were willing to adopt these black children can't. Now we have to rely on the black parents who probably weren't willing to before. Anyway, they don't actually solve this problem rather than just reducing the amount of foster parents available. But now on why these foster parents are likely to actually care about diversity, why they're likely to be open-minded enough to try and bring this culture to these children. If these foster parents are willing to adopt a child of a different race in the first place, they're also likely to be open-minded enough to be willing to actually learn the culture and bring elements of it into it, or at least try to, or encourage this child to explore their culture in other means. Why is this? Because if they are going to invest so much time into raising a child of a different race, they're necessarily also probably not closed-minded enough to ignore aspects of their cultural background, or to just to reject the cultural identity altogether. This means that they're likely to encourage them to explore their culture in other diverse means, such as, for example, in New Zealand, perhaps a foster parent of a Maori Pacifica child encouraging them to explore polyfest, encouraging them to explore their culture in other ways. Because of the fact that our case is actually more grounded in reality, we were suggesting that the parents are adopting children, minority children, that are in a culture where there are other minority children like them, they can still explore other avenues to develop their culture. Maybe it's true that in the Afghan example, there won't be another Afghan club or society available to teach them Afghani culture. But as we already outlined at first, the problems of their unlikelihood to actually be adopted means that those harms are far greater. That is, even if we have some cultural dilution, we prefer that to having the child not be adopted in the first place and stuck in the foster care system. Why also is it unlikely to be non-open parents? The level of investment that they have to put in this child means that they're likely to care about them personally, and they're also likely to care enough about cultural roots to be willing to explore raising a child of a different culture of their own. Remember, it's difficult for the parents too, which means that if they're willing to do it, they're likely to be willing to put in the effort to learn how to do it. Second, because society is generally just becoming more progressive, the likelihood that a parent is subscribes to these progressive ideals, doesn't have these regressive tendencies just tokenized, are far greater. Over time, in fact, parents actually become more educated about other cultures if they have a child of a different culture, because they're invested in that child, that they start to, for example, take this child to these cultural events, encourage them to explore their culture, and in the meantime, learning more about themselves. Third, then, on how the affirmative model signals segregationism and is completely regressive. Let's go back to the children stuck in foster care. If they are mostly minority children, then by not allowing white parents to adopt them, you're signaling to them that they're incompatible, that for all the attempts to bring about racial equality, it's still being signaled by the government that they are simply not compatible enough to be in a family together. That is to say, that they cannot truly integrate. This reaffirms traditionalist, regressive ideas about how cultures and races integrate in society, and it's harmful to the progression that we've seen in society where cultures have become more diverse and our societies have become more diverse with them. This is harmful principally, but also practically based on how values of others are reaffirmed. If you are, for example, a traditional conservative, older member of the public who believes that these races, you might not be explicitly racist, but believes that they can't integrate properly, that society can't really be fully culturally integrated, this signal by the government that yes, they can't be in the family, will also signal to you that that is true in society, that it is true that they cannot fully actually integrate in society. And it's also harmful to existing families, which my second speaker will split on, because it signals that that relationship should never have happened. Those interracial families should never have happened because they're just simply incompatible. This is harmful because of the way it stigmatizes cultural diversity in a progressive society. Not only are minority children less adopted, they're harmed culturally, society is harmed, crowds go opposed.